Hi everyone, back to Evermore YouTube channel. It's Chris back with my rant stroke thought of the day, and it's all about transfers still, whirling around in everybody's mind. The transfer activity, or the lack of activity with Newcastle United. What on earth is going on? Well, there's a journalist who's penned a piece which explains it quite well actually, and you'd be surprised to hear me praise this journalist because I have criticised them in the past to the point where I think they actually blocked me on X because I was a little bit upset about one of their pieces previously, but I'm going to give credit where it's due to Luke Edwards of The Telegraph, who's wrote the piece. Mark's put the link below about where Newcastle United currently find themselves in this bigger picture of trying to improve their squad and keep a hold of their top players. And it's a really well-written piece by Luke Edwards, to be fair. And he's talking about just the lack of financial headroom for Newcastle United. Have they hit the ceiling, is what he's saying. And it looks very much like we have. Now, we are fishing for players in bigger ponds this season. The club have tried to improve the squad. They try to have a stronger depth in squad where they can have a really good go at the Premier League and the Champions League. So, therefore, they've been after targets that other bigger clubs will have on their radar. But this is a kind of multifaceted problem here, which I'll try and unpack as best as I can in our own Evermore style, as always. But the issue Newcastle United have is all of the players that they've targeted have been targeted by what you would call the kind of traditional top six, greedy six, red cartel, whatever you want to talk about, whatever you want to call them. And they are way more financially well off than we are because PSR and FFP was brought in to stop Newcastle United doing exactly what they're trying to do this transfer market, and that is to enhance their squad, to buy quality in depth. And this is what's preventing them doing it. So Newcastle United are at that point now, that tipping point where they've got the 8th highest wage bill in the Premier League. If they go any higher, which they're going to have to keep a hold of Alexander Isak, they could potentially go past Aston Villa, who are also in trouble, who are talking about maybe having to sell Morgan Rogers, a player that they bought for 15 million quid, to try and balance the books, maybe even Jacob Ramsey as well. So this is PSR at its finest for the Premier League. This is why it was created, why it was invented. They don't want to see something like Manchester City happen again, or Blackburn, or even ironically Chelsea, who did it when Chelsea were always kind of also rans, and then all of a sudden Abramovich's money came in, they exploded into this serial winning team that won trophy after trophy and signed the best players and blew everybody out of the market. That was the Premier League and the greedy six's worst nightmare when Newcastle were bought by the PIF of Saudi Arabia. And I saw that clip doing the rounds about Jurgen Klopp talking about Newcastle don't have a scene like Manchester City. And it was people like Jurgen Klopp and his club that pushed this through with the Premier League, that allowed this ridiculous ruling to be put into place. And I honestly do think Newcastle United are in a head-on collision course with progress versus PSR. And I think for Newcastle to progress, they're going to have to breach PSR. They're going to have to get to that point where they breach it and there's some kind of form of punishment coming over the hill. Now, what I would say with that is that the punishment that Everton got, they retracted back on. The punishment that Nottingham Forest got, they retracted back on. The initial fine and points deduction, it was all retracted back on. Same with Leicester City as well. And the same thing will happen to Newcastle United as well. If the people are all petrified that they're going to relegate us, they won't relegate us. They'll punish us, and then they'll probably roll back in it and renege on it a little bit as well. But Newcastle are in a lose situation here. That the people who own them are some of the richest people on the planet, and if there was no financial restraints, could buy whoever they want and pay whatever they want, right? You don't probably want that to happen. That's not good for football, and I understand that, right? But there has to be some kind of compromise in the middle. I feel Newcastle United are waiting for the Manchester City court case, which could be kicked down the road for another 3 or 4 years. Because let's face it, the Premier League do not want to lose face. If the Premier League punish City, they might lose Pep Guardiola from the league. They might lose Erling Haaland from the league. They might lose Bernardo Silva from the league. All these players that are marketable, sexy players for their product, and the manager, who's arguably the best manager in the history of football in many eyes, disappears from the league. You lose some marketability of the league. They don't want that to happen. And equally, they're going to have to be seen to do something to enforce the bullshit rules that they put in place. So the Premier League have backed themselves up against a wall here. But going back to Luke Edwards' piece, he's absolutely right. Every player that we've tried for and looked at, we've either been rejected by or blown out the water by. Now, that means Newcastle have got to show a certain level of innovation in the boardroom and in the infrastructure of the football club. And the problem is the club is in completely disarray. It is. The more and more you hear about the appointment of Paul Mitchell, the more and more it sounds like a terrible appointment, a disastrous move. Darren Neal's bringing in one of his buddies, nowhere near the right kind of fit for the football club where we are at this kind of stage of our development. Nowhere near. The clubs that he worked for before are probably way further down the line than we were in terms of our evolution as a football club or reinvention as a football club. He clashed with the manager. He upset the players. Amanda Staley was the opposite of this kind of guy. She promised everybody the world, and maybe in typical salesperson fashion, over-promise. You know, I'm in sales, you never over-promise. You under-promise and over-deliver. That's the rule, Amanda. And she obviously did the other way around. And that's where the likes of Isak are pissed because they're not getting the contract that they thought they were going to get. But Edwards' piece really does unpack the situation Newcastle are in right now, and in a really good way. It doesn't improve anything. It doesn't change anything. I think Newcastle have potentially gone for targets that are a little bit beyond them, because if other clubs are in there, and I think Edwards sums up really well in the piece where he says Newcastle are fine as long as there's no competition. If there's competition, they're in trouble because they can't pay the going rate for a player and a transfer fee, and they can't pay the wages. And this is where the head-on collision situation comes, because do Newcastle pay Alexander Isak 300 grand a week? You know, what does that mean? What's the implications? Have you got to move on another big wage earner? Kieran Trippier is 34 years old. We've got Timo Livramento. We've got, you know, Emil Kraft, who granted looked terrible against Celtic, but everybody did. Leo Sahar coming through. You know, Jacob Murphy can fill in at full-back. Is it time to move Trippier on for that wage bill to free up to keep Isak, because that's more important to the team? These big decisions have to be made. You know, and Eddie Howe can't necessarily always make them because he's kind of torn in the middle, you know, between the players and the progress of the football club, and that's not his job to do it. That's why you hire people like directors of football. But let's get it right. The current infrastructure that's been at the football club upstairs have not delivered. You know, 2 failed director of footballs, bad decisions on the surface of it, a lack of commercial deals, no training ground sponsor. Outside of the stack, really, there's not much I can see that they've done as a football club in terms of the commercial dream team, and that's a real big problem. Do the PIF need to start switching the focus a little bit from the World Cup and the Saudi Pro League back to the team that they own 80% in, and try and put one of their own people in there to maybe get things moving in the right direction again? Because Newcastle United are in a situation, I think, where they're going to have to breach, or they're going to have to be more innovative and look at other areas of recruitment like they did last time. And this is another reason as well. The likes of Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal, we beat them to players like Bruno Guimaraes, Sven Botman, Alexander Isak, you know, Timo Livramento, Lewis Hall. You know, they weren't quite there. Their scouts hadn't quite given them back a glowing enough report to sign those players. Make no mistake about it, those scouts would have had their arses kicked by those big football clubs, wondering why the fuck did we miss out on these players? Why didn't we sign Bruno Guimaraes and Sven Botman? They would have been raging about it. And what those big clubs would have been able to do is throw money at it, hire another 5 or 6 or 7 scouts, put them into the areas where the Newcastle scouts were getting success, and pipping us to the post on players, taking players away from us. But then they can throw in the wage bills, then they can throw in the transfer fees, and that's what football is all about at the minute. Greedy agents driving up revenue streams to get bigger commissions, you know, influencers, you know, helping influence transfers by social media output and throughput. We know who they all are. You know, here we go. You know what I'm saying? But it's not good. It really isn't good right now. The world of Newcastle United right now is not particularly good. I feel like we've gone to some kind of country club that we don't have the money to belong in, and we kind of, they're laughing at us and pointing at us on the other side of the room as they're taking all the, you know, the best food from the from the entrees, you know, away in the corner and eating them, and we're sat there eating a bag of ready salted crisps and drinking water, you know, and it's just not good enough. It really isn't good enough, and I don't know what's to blame, whether it's Newcastle's initial tactics from the outlay, whether it's the failed directors of football, you know, whether we haven't been inventive and creative enough in the transfer market. But I do think Edwards' piece is sobering, but also very realistic in terms of an eye-opener as to where Newcastle United are right now. We're right up against this ceiling because of the lack of commercial revenue from the sins of the past with Mike Ashley, but also the maybe the lack of progress from the present occupants of those positions. This commercial dream team, Silverstone and the like that came in. Where's the deals? Where's the extra money? What the fuck is going on? You know, nothing seems to be happening. It's like we're waiting for that City court case before we're able to do anything. And it's handcuffing Newcastle United right now. It really, really is. But I definitely read the piece. I think it's a really good piece from Luke Edwards. I will give him his credit where it's due. Very sobering. Very disturbing, I think, for Newcastle United as fan bases, because we wonder what the hell's going on, where we're going to go with this. But yeah, it's definitely worth a read. I don't know what the club are going to do the rest of this window. I feel like they've gone down a route with all these targets that it's too late to go for the targets, and they may be deemed as panic buys. But they've got 5 weeks to try and sort this out. Get Howe a quality right-sided centre-half. Get him a good midfield that replace Sean Longstaff. Get him a centre-forward. Get him a goalkeeper. And we've still got a chance to save this window, but I'm not entirely sure the club can do it. And I feel like we've drove down a dead end here that we can't really turn left or right, and we're going to have to reverse back out and pick another route, which means another window in the mud, really, for Newcastle United. But let us know in the comments below what you guys think. Let me know what you think about the Luke Edwards piece if you've read it as well. Like I said, don't always give him credit, but I'll give him credit for that piece. I think it was a well-written piece and sobering and a real good dissection as to where we are as a football club right now. But thanks for watching, guys. Keep it evermore. Click like and subscribe. We'll be back with more content soon. Catch you later.
Heroes celebrate. They have done it.